asked the attorney, Lake County State's Attorney, Michael Nearham, you know.
Right.
He hit this link right here.
All right. Yeah, this is the article that was printed on the Bradley Report and discusses the online discussion of the wrongful convictions surging, the exonerations of the wrongfully convicted, hitting a record high in 2014. And the article indicates that 125 people in the United States were exonerated in 2014, and the states that had the most exonerations were Texas, New York, and of course our Illinois. So for years we have been dealing with, you know, the tragedy of people wrongfully convicted, and you know, this article is excellent because it shows you know, that the numbers of people are surging. And I thought one of the most interesting thing about this article is that it gives a lot of credit to the conviction integrity units of the various state's attorneys and prosecutors throughout the United States. Yeah, so by now the public at large and everyone in the United States knows that it's an almost epidemic proportion of people being in jail wrongfully incarcerated. When you see those types of numbers, 125 people exonerated, you know, in 1 year, you have to ask yourselves how many people are in jail that were not exonerated. How many people could DNA assist in revealing that they have the wrong person who's been incarcerated? And we're seeing this every single day. Yeah, the Chicago Sun-Times did a story on this case just this last week, and this is involving the case of one Mark Maxson, who was convicted in 1992 of a horrible rape and murder of a 6-year-old child. The interesting thing about this case is that right now, and the subject of this article was, we did persuade the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to do a round of DNA testing on the evidence that was found at the scene. There was blood, there was hair, there was evidence on glass that was used as a murder weapon, and all of that they agreed to test and, you know, see whether the DNA samples would match Mark Maxson's profile. This is a technology that was not in existence 23 years ago. The really interesting thing about this case is there was technology, of course, to handle blood testing 23 years ago, and the blood testing that they did excluded Mark Maxson, which is quite interesting. Also, there was pubic hair found at the scene, which involved a sexual assault, and that pubic hair also excluded Mark Maxson. By the way, the victim of this crime, he was also excluded from the blood and pubic hair analysis of the Chicago crime lab.
Elliot, it was amazing what you had mentioned about the fact that DNA didn't exist at the time,
right,
in his case. And from the article that I was reading in the Sun-Times on the individual who was just released from Stateville, Christopher Abernathy, Alvarez, the Cook County State's Attorney, she had even made mention. She said even though she don't think the actions of police that they did anything wrong, they were acting the way they would act 30 years ago, she said, adding that modern DNA testing wasn't available then. Alvarez said she agreed to test biological evidence of Hickey's clothes, who was the victim, and the body, and hired a private lab to speed up the process. The same unidentified person was tied to each of the DNA profile created from the samples, and that's how they was able to free this man, Abernathy. And then, Elliot, you were sharing with me about the symposium that you had went to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, about 2 months ago there was a symposium at Northwestern University which deals a lot with the wrongfully accused, and many of the state's attorneys from out the country, one the assistant DA for Brooklyn, New York, from Houston, Texas, and Miss Alvarez from Chicago, which again are the three leading states, according to the article from Waukegan, in Reuters on wrongful convictions were at this symposium, and they discussed the thrust of the prosecution and the role of the prosecution in these wrongful conviction cases. And as you said, Gator, 30 years ago it was a different world. It was a different world. People had faith that the police were doing the right thing, and the police, had a suspect in custody. They believed that he was the real suspect, and many times they went overboard in getting statements from a person through pressure and things like that, and worse, because as you know, we have torture cases and things like that. But many times the police went overboard in getting a statement, and then years later, DNA tests would come up and free the person. So what you're quoting here in the paper is a perfect example. 30 years ago, they probably thought this guy was guilty. And, here we have DNA tests that show he's excluded. But the real interesting part of this story, again, is that these state's attorneys' offices across the country are now at the forefront of doing DNA testing and taking a role where they are looking to exonerate people who are wrongfully convicted rather than just prosecuting anyone who happens to be charged. And there's a huge, huge difference. So, we have to commend, the actions of these state's attorneys, including Ms. Alvarez here in Cook County, for taking these actions on these cases, and here giving testing that, making it quicker than other testing than by going to a private lab, because sometimes these DNA tests do take a real long time.
Right.
And in Mr. Maxson's case, same thing. I mean, he was exonerated, but the DNA test that is giving now, has the potential of finding the real killer.
Real killer.
Now, he wasn't exonerated, he was excluded, excuse me.
Right.
Our hope is that the real killer who was out there on the streets or out there in the penitentiary somewhere, because many of these people are multiple killer type individuals or rapists and stuff like that. They do it over and over again, and their DNA base is now in the system. And that goes into the National Data Bank, and that can expose who the real killer is, which has happened in numerous cases. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen. And what we are looking for in Mr. Maxson, because we're certain, as the blood evidence in his trial showed it was not him, we're certain the DNA evidence will show the same thing, but it can go one step further and identify who the real killer is.
Right. And something else, it would save taxpayers money as well. I think if Cook County State's Attorney Alvarez used her full weight behind the integrity unit to help right or wrong and bring back integrity within the justice system, it would benefit Cook County as a whole, or should I say, it would help Illinois remain a #1 state to help right wrongs with these convictions being overturned.
Yeah, and something has to be done. I mean, this is the aftermath of the tragedy of the John Burge years and all of the bodies that have, gone to jail wrongfully. I wasn't born yesterday, so I know not everyone is in jail wrongfully, but many, many are, and we're seeing many of these victims being exonerated now. So there has to be some procedural safeguards put in place to protect this situation, that it doesn't happen again, and that's the main thing we have here. Like, for example, with the confessions, the law now on murder cases is that there has to be videotape so that we see what happens in these confession situations. Not we're just taking the police officer's word, well, we walked into the room and he told me he did it, type of thing.
Right.
And, we had that case up in Skokie.
Skokie, right.
With Mr. Coe, where, the actual videotape is what won him an acquittal. Because you could see on the videotape this man who lost his son was just browbeaten into making admissions, if you want to call him that he's the one who killed his son. And it was highly, highly questionable. Without the use of a video camera monitoring what happened in that confession room, he would have been doing 50 years to life.
That's right.
you know, and his family would be with the other families, you know,
Devastated.
living across the state from Stateville in a trailer home, you know, rooting for their son to get out someday. So something has to be done. So we have the DNA testing, we have the videotaping of confessions, we have other methods that are being employed. And again, the most noble part of this story and angle of this conversation is that the state's attorneys are joining us in seeking justice.
That's right.
You know, seeking to put away people who actually did the murder, not just having a body to imprison and close the case.
It's like we both want a fair, non-biased prosecution, fair representation from both ends of the spectrum to make sure everyone get a fair trial and the victims know for sure that the individuals that cause harm to their family member are the ones that's in jail serving the time.
Yeah, and they're not doing any justice to the victims putting the wrong person in jail. You know, they may feel good that someone got convicted for a while, but if they really knew what happened, you know, or something gets exposed 20 years later, I mean, the whole system is thrown out of whack. They never really get closure.
Never.
And you know, the whole system is built on some sort of truth-seeking system, and this should not be what it's about, just putting people away and getting convictions. This is an age-old conversation. You know, what is the duty of a prosecutor? To get a conviction or to seek truth and justice? And, you know, on the books, obviously, the latter would be the choice.
The choice,
but
right.
in reality, you know, people have a job to do and people want to win. You know, and people get carried away and get swept into the idea of winning and the idea of, you know, getting a promotion and all of these other things that go along with it, closing a case, not admitting that they did something wrong or that, you know, they overlooked something that could have led to someone's freedom. You know, and then we have these stories, and this is why we're having these stories day after day after day.
Day after day.
And, you know, we have to do something about it.
Like I say, it's the right time, and one of the things that people need to understand about you, Elliot, is that you do everything that needs to be done on behalf of your client, be it in the court of law or in the court of public opinion. You know, I've seen you on the protest lines, you know what I'm saying, and I've seen you in the courts. And one thing I do know, everyone know that if you represent them, you're going to give your all to your client, ethically and professionally. And I know Mr. Maxson got to feel good to know that you his attorney at the right time, because everywhere I go, I was in Lake County, I saw the same thing. The integrity unit over there is doing wonderful work with trying to find out who the individual that committed the crime, as opposed to just accepting someone who's been convicted. And you know, that's a plus for the state of Illinois, and that's a plus for the prosecution's office, you know, and it is what it is. Go at the ones that committed the crime as opposed to just having someone locked up.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Gator, for the acknowledgement, and I certainly want to acknowledge your work and your voice in the community is speaking for justice for all of these years. We've known each other for how many years? 25 years?
25 years.
25 years. We met actually at the Gang Peace Summit, where there was a peace treaty that was televised on Primetime Live,
yeah.
where there actually was not a shooting in the city of Chicago in Cabrini Green for about a year, I believe, after the peace treaty was signed, and that's where we met. So we've known each other a long time, and Gator has been a friend and a client and a co-worker on many of these cases, fighting for justice, and always a strong voice in the community for what's right for people of all races, colors, and creeds.
Right.
You know, justice, fairness, that's what we're looking for. So thank you for that.
No, man. That's how we do.
Thank you. United in peace.
Right, man.